people say it's been slightly watered down, the government ambition. It depends what way you look at it. The reality is that fibre will only get to a certain percentage of the country. That's just the realities of it. And either the government want to pay want to infill that as much as they can, but there's still 1 to 2% that is going to just fall outside of that bracket, and that'll be predominantly wireless, we'll assume, at that point.
Do you have a sort of sense, because you obviously would know the other alt nets, as they get called, that are in this area, but if you look at all the plans that have sort of been scoped out, including yours, and what Openreach is doing and what City Fibre's doing, what are we looking at in terms of where this will end up coverage-wise without the kind of government being done?
The 85% target by the end of 2025 is definitely achievable now.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast on the hottest day of the year so far in the UK. It's like 30, oh my God.
31.
Yeah. My wife was getting really hyperbolic. She goes, they say it's going to get up to 40. I was like, 40? No. It's never got up to 40, has it? No. So anyway, it's really nice and hot, but we're for once grateful for the kind of turbo-powered AC we got here. So that's all groovy. Before I go any further, because last week I got into it and then suddenly William sort of piped up and I hadn't introduced him. So I'm going to get into that bit of introducing. We're delighted to welcome another special guest this week. We've got Jarlath Finnegan, who's the CEO of Giganet. Did I not screw that up?
Yeah, absolutely perfect.
Cool. We had a long chat beforehand, and some of it was talking about how English people screw up Irish names. So,
no, I wouldn't dare try to write it down, though.
Well, strangely, as far as I'm concerned, for Irish names, Jarlath is more or less spelt as it's pronounced, except I suppose that extra I in there, people might leave that one out.
There's no I in it.
Oh, so I just imagined the I. I imagine. Do you know what there is? I've even got it in if I was more professional, I would have just looked at my laptop and gone, there's no fucking I in Jarlath. Why did I think there was an I? Anyway, there we go. So, in a way, that kind of proves my point. Through my anxiety, I overcomplicate it. So we're delighted to have you here, Jarlath, and once I've finished talking shit, we're going to find out all about you and your company.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. Well, actually, before we go any further, Jarlath has totally stepped up to the plate on the bribe front. William, if you're listening, this sort of offsets your complete lack of bribes last week. I know William, our last week's guest, is a regular listener, but that's fine, William. You don't have to bribe us. No one does. I don't want our compliance people to start thinking I'm soliciting. But nonetheless, we have here. So, on one level, it's incredibly generous anyway. A Giganet rucksack. Looks like a decent one. Looks like some people do the branded rucksacks and they're like entry level, and you're like, oh, why did you bother? But you've gone for it in this one. And
it's
then
fibre, isn't it? Premium product.
These are the best.
Yeah,
just
is it made of recycled fibre?
Not yet.
And it's got and we've got the often the usual goodie bag type of stuff. Not mean to sound dismissive. This looks excellent. Copper vacuum insulation. Is that like a water jug?
Yes.
And then we've got the obligatory lanyard, which I'll obviously be wearing later on tonight, just to attract the ladies. And then this is an insulated cup, is it? So we've got a jug and a cup.
I like a good cup like that.
So that's all good. Oh, and he even brought one for you, by the way, Pierre.
What?
You're not used to getting bribes. You've got one of these.
I got one.
Yeah. Look at that. Are you digging the cup?
I would be drinking beer in there.
Yeah.
Right.
This summer.
Yeah.
So, but that's just the start of it. I mean, all this is great by itself, but then. So we were joking. I don't know if we did it on camera when we had Ronan Kelly, but
no, it was off camera.
I was winding up Ian because when we had Ronan Kelly on, who was the Adtran guy, who's also from Ireland, as Jarlath is, and we weren't drinking, and Ian made some comment about how it would be nice to have a Guinness, and Ronan just goes, yeah, I don't drink Guinness, and I was just taking a piss out of Ian for stereotyping Irish people.
Yeah,
but. Sometimes Irish people make it easy to stereotype them because Jarlath's only gone and whacked in some Irish whiskey with this stuff. Yeah. Now, I know from talking in advance, so this is Bushmills, which is an excellent Irish whiskey, but I know from talking in advance that he's actually given us a dilemma. I'm going to leave this out because I think we're going to have to do a whiskey tasting. So he's one bag's got a Bushmills in it. Let's see, this is like alcoholic lucky dip. One bag's got Jameson's in it. And then
we need a bigger table.
And then the last bag has a Tullamore Dew. Is that how I pronounce it?
That's it.
Tullamore Dew. So I think that's the one I look off just superficially, just because I'm more familiar with the other ones. But I think so. We got a fight over them, lads.
Yeah.
And I think one way in which we can help work out which ones we should have is just try them all. What do you reckon?
Sure.
Sorry, I've just got the mic over there. So I'm going to pour some out. Ian.
Yeah.
While I'm doing that, why don't you start a little bit of small talk with Jarlath, and then
by all means.
I'll do the rest of the stuff once we've done that, because it's important that we get this out of the way.
Jarlath, good to have you on. And I mean, a good starting point, I think, is maybe just sort of introduce yourself and tell people a bit about Giganet. People who might not be familiar with the company. Obviously, you're in the fibre space, but it'd be nice to know. Where you've come from, I guess, and there's a bit of a sort of fibre frenzy, I think, going on in not just in the UK, actually. I think it's a European theme, that there's a huge amount of fibre investment going on and lots of activity. So how does Giganet sort of fit into all of that?
Yeah, sure is. And again, thanks for the great introduction. And I suppose from myself, I'm just hello to everybody. I'm Jarlath Finnegan, the CEO of Giganet. And my career started out in cable TV in the mid-90s with cable and wireless in those great days, which moved on to Telewest, which moved on to NTL, and which moved on to what is now Virgin Media. And I started out in that piece, and I suppose what's going on with fibre today wasn't too unlike what was happening during that period in terms of the growth. Just a different time, different technology, of course. And I've been involved predominantly. It's always a good sound.
It is.
I've been involved predominantly in the design and build and the customer side, the customer installation side. That's predominantly where my background has been. So I'm now the CEO of Giganet. We've just in the past 15 months we've received a large investment from Fern Trading, which is advised by Octopus Investments, and our vision is to be the best ISP in the UK. So effectively, we want to be able to be the challenger on a nationwide basis across the UK, and we're doing this in a number of ways. We're doing it by building our own network in parts of southern England that's been underserved in the past. And we're also harnessing the power of City Fibre and Openreach's fibre networks as well to sell across the UK. We have grown exponentially in the last 15 months. We've gone from 23 people to 170 as I sit here today, and we're just in a really exciting space at the moment. I suppose is one way. It's exciting, terrifying, frustrating. All the things you'd expect when an industry like this, it's a once in a lifetime, once in a generation type movement, as I'm calling it at the moment, and we want to be at the forefront of that. We want to try and break some of the traditional stuff about people's frustrations in terms of tied into contracts. They need to leave the contract for whatever reasons. They get termination charges. They get bill shock halfway through their contract. It's discounted for a while and then it goes up halfway through. So that's the key differences for us, I suppose. We're trying to remove all those things that people would have experienced in the past, and try to make it as easy and simple for people to understand what service they're getting and how much it's going to cost them.
And what's your take on why? Because you're part of this.
Ian,
but go on, Scott.
Can you hold that?
Yeah.
Because I want to, before
Drink
we get
whiskey.
fully into it, part of the reason I kicked it off was just so that we didn't have dead time while I was pouring out this whiskey, which you both did, especially Jarlath, an excellent job of filling that time. Thank you, and not getting distracted by my wrestling with plastic coatings and all that sort of thing. I think we should just give these a go now.
Yeah, okay.
Get it out of the way. Now, we're familiar with Jameson's, but why don't you give that one a sip? I'll give it a go. What are you saying, Pierre? Are you joining in the Irish stuff, or are you being good? Did you cycle here?
Well, I'll try it.
Yeah.
Give it a go.
It's good.
There's
But
Jameson.
I
Do
need
you want to
that.
give this a go? I mean, Jonathan, you're welcome. You're obviously, well, I say obviously, I was about to stereotype like Ian. I presume you're familiar with them all.
I'll give it a try, though.
That's nice and smooth. That's the Jameson's. Look, I even got all organised. I put the glass and the bottle in front of it. So that's Jameson's.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
It's very nice.
Okay. Tullamore Dew. So, should we try and be pretentious and sort of describe it? Jameson's just smooth. I mean, it's smoother than the typical Scotch. It doesn't have that sort of...
I'm getting apricot.
You're getting apricot.
Tons of...
I'm getting stone fruit.
I'm getting a finish of asparagus.
Just a flutter of...
Leather finish.
Ireland will be well known for its apricot harvest each year.
Flinty notes, maybe. Okay, so now we're on to Tullamore Dew.
Tullamore Dew. I mean, obviously the Bushmills is the more expensive one, isn't it?
Tullamore Dew to me... I don't know.
They're all pretty similar, actually.
Really?
Yeah, Jameson is probably, it's the most, let's say, commoditized.
Jameson's like the
my favourite
best
Irish
known.
whiskey is...
That one's got a bit more of an edge to it.
My favourite Irish whiskey is
quite
Yellow
nice,
Spot.
actually.
It is nice, yeah.
You know Yellow Spot?
No.
Is that an Irish whiskey? I bought an Irish whiskey once called, like, Feckin' Irish Whiskey or something like that. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Honestly, it actually uses like that sort of Father Ted vernacular in the label. Yeah, that's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, that's nice.
Like the other day,
We filled it. We're going to have a dilemma at the end of the pod.
I don't think there'll be much of a dilemma.
Okay, and so now we've got the Bushmills. Is that right? Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which sets itself apart by having a cork rather than a screw. I don't know if that's sort of posher.
To give rise to that very nice sound at the...
that squeaky sound that I make.
You know, the other day I was in Screwfix and there was a glue that was called Stick Like Shit. The I was like bleeped out, but...
That Bushmills is the closest to Scotch to me. It's got a bit more of that sort of barley, sort of sharper edge to it.
If you're feeling poorly during the winter with cold or flus, hot Bushmills is...
Is that what we do in Ireland?
Lots of water, sugar, lemon, and
parents
cloves.
This is not medical advice?
I've heard. I think it's my parents or grandparents talking about giving kids like whiskey when they were little babies, just get them to go to sleep. That's how they used to do it back in the day. So I don't know. I guess we'll fight over them at the end. I think Tullamore Dew might be my favourite of those three.
I think Bushmills is the more interesting one.
I'll stay with the Jamesons.
Okay, well that's done then, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a done deal. Just bear in mind with Bushmills, you got a cork there, so keep it upright while you're getting home.
I think we should leave them here for future guests.
Or just for future car crash pods.
I don't think so.
So that's that. So let's just get the rest of the preliminary bollocks out of the way before we get back into it. But thanks again for that. That was a great treat. And
It's already been 15 minutes.
It sets a worrying precedent. Yeah, but we did do some substantial stuff.
Yeah.
The only other stuff... I thought I mentioned at the end of the last pod I was going to see Top Gun Maverick. I thought I'd give a quick review of that. I went with my dad and my son, 3 generations of Pacino. My dad and my son liked it more than I did. I thought it was good, but it was generic action film for me. No plotting at all. Cliches everywhere.
But they actually flew the planes. Remember what I was saying in the run-up to this, and you two were like, "Oh yeah, rubbish." And I was saying they actually had a lot of the actors were in the planes doing
I knew that.
the flying themselves.
Yeah.
And the director said a film like that,
without even some pilot helping them.
They had training by the pilots in the US Air Force, they had.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously all the hard stuff would have been done by proper.
Only
US
time
Air
The
Force
close-up
pilots,
shots in the cockpit was them actually in the cockpit.
No,
and they
the
were getting
actors
out
flew
and
the
throwing
planes.
up afterwards, and whereas normally you do it in a simulator in a Hollywood movie these days, and you wouldn't have planes leased to you, which they did, and all this sort of stuff. So the director was saying this is probably the last film that will get made that's like this, because it's sort of we're sort of beyond that whole fighter pilot phase anyway. Everything's unmanned drones these days, and
I haven't seen it yet.
either,
But anybody I spoke to said that had seen the original or remembered the original of that age, right, which isn't that old. They said it wasn't as good. Right. But anybody that hadn't seen the first one or didn't understand the first one in detail, we'd say like we would, thought it was brilliant.
How's the scene with Val Kilmer? Because I know they dubbed his voice.
Yeah, because did they?
Well, they use his voice
because the actor himself has had, is it throat cancer?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, and the character he played also had. I don't think they explicitly said it, but he'd obviously got some illness that affected his speech. Yeah, it was just very short. He wasn't in it much. It was just a sort of nod to say, "Oh, bless Val Kilmer and his health problems."
Because they use AI they basically looked at former like old movies that he did and use his voice to make new.
Because he can't. What? Can he not talk at all?
He talks like this bad.
Shit.
Yeah. It's really bad. He has to like press something.
It was very nostalgic.
You can barely understand him.
That's where I'll give it credit. It was nostalgic and it was unapologetically so. It was basically celebrating the whole vibe of the first Top Gun, celebrating Tom Cruise as well. I mean, Tom Cruise, he seems a bit mental in some ways. He's got the Scientology stuff going on, but as a Hollywood superstar,
dedicated.
I mean, you can't argue with what he
looks pretty good for
what
a
he
guy
delivers.
60.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, just the effort he puts in every movie.
Yeah, he's totally committed. And, you know, he didn't look, you know, he's next to all these people who are like in their 20s. He didn't look that old. I don't know how much makeup he was wearing. But anyway, so my review of that is it's good, but just generic action film. If you want a romp and you're into fighter jets, then it's great. If you want anything that engages your higher brain, don't bother.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
That's every
Sounds
movie
like my
in
kind of
cinemas.
film then.
Well, there we are. Yeah, it was about your intellectual
Engaging
level.
your
Ian.
higher brain. No thanks.
Have we got any other bullshit to talk about before I get into it? No, okay.
No, I
So
think
just
we've
to
talked
remind
about
you
bullshit.
that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. All right, thanks for bearing with us, Jonathan. I mean, you've listened to one or two pods before, have you? You know that we tend
certainly
to
have.
talk lots of shit before we actually get going.
And when we get going.
And anyway, it's your fault that we took so long for bringing all this lovely whiskey, so you've only yourself to blame. Yeah, okay, Ian, so I interrupted you. Jonathan just introduced sort of Giganet and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to jump in because I just wanted to get your take on why this is happening now. You know, we've gone through a long period of broadband. It's been around for... I don't know when the first sort of ADSL stuff came along, but it's a long story. And all of a sudden we see people used to worry about investing even in these sorts of networks, and all of a sudden there seems to be a lot of private equity money going there. There's loads of companies in the market. I mean, I know there's some really tiny players that are doing villages with fibre deployments, but what spurred all of this?
I really think it was down to the likes of City Fibre. If I'm being perfectly honest, they seem to be the first players, the likes of Greg and his original team. They seem to be the first guys that said, you know, there's something in this. Let's go at it. And they were at it at a stage where that money wasn't available, and they had to, you know, generate that interest, prove out what, you know, the benefits this could bring. And I think, you know, their success story has been amazing.
They keep getting more funding as well.
Like they're fully funded now for their build, which is just short of $5 billion, which is an amazing story for them.
Decent chunk of change.
So, you know, they are de facto open access challenger.
They're a company that because you're quite different from a lot of the other players in that you're using companies like City Fibre to some extent, and also OpenReach, the sort of bit of BT.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're also building your own.
That's
network.
that's the kind of uniqueness with us, is that we are building our own network as well, but also how we connect with OpenReach and City Fibre. You know, we're investing lots of money in our own core network and building that resiliency into the network. So, you know, you can do it cheaply or you can do it properly, and we are doing it properly. Our investors believe heavily in what we're doing. They believe in the plan, and I think back to your point about why now and why the investment, I think it's infrastructure at its core, right? And investors like infrastructure, especially infrastructure investors. It's, you know, it's a relatively safe bet in terms of the assets themselves, provided they're, you know, they're built properly. You know, they're low. It's low maintenance. It's a long payback, but you know, that's a nice steady flow. And I think what's driven that on even further is the whole, you know, the pandemic has certainly, you know, driven the agenda forward, but also Brexit. You know, the UK economy wants to become, you know, high-tech digital economy, and it you know, it was way behind in terms of that whole digital connectivity piece. It just wasn't happening. From 2001 until, you know, 2010, nothing happened in of any great shape in terms of the fixed market in the UK.
Yep.
Mobile kept moving all the time, of course, with 2G, 3G, 4G, but the fixed market was just stagnant. So I think now the realization is that, you know, if the UK is going to stand outside Europe and it's going to be, you know, a leader in its space, it's going to have have that digital connectivity, and the government have picked up on that kind of stuff, and they're supporting it, and they're putting commitment into it as well. And I suppose that shows confidence for for investors and for us as a business as well, that the government are putting large chunks of change on the table to infill where commercial won't happen.
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The various forces at play that seem to be supporting, pushing, benignly affecting the sort of fibre world. So you talked about the political side of it. We got all kinds of weird stuff going on to do with politics and telecoms in general, which has been great for us in previous years in terms of giving us something to write about.
Yeah.
Obviously sort of Huawei stuff and all that sort of thing. But I remember Boris Johnson, this is our Prime Minister, when he was just running, I think, for leadership of the Tory party, was banging on about broadband even then and just throwing random targets all over the place, wasn't he? Like, we've got 100%.
It was part of his manifesto to have 100% all fibre coverage by 2025, which I remember being at an event, that Total Telecom one that happens in
connected
when I think he'd written an article in the Telegraph that morning, and people were sort of walking around chuckling at how unrealistic this is going to be. But a lot of people did say, all right, it's a bit over ambitious to say we're going to have fibre 100% coverage by 2025, but you sort of need to aim high. If you don't have those lofty ambitions, then it's like you say, I want to be the number one tennis player in the world, don't you? And then maybe you get to 90 and you're happy, but you don't. You don't sort of go, I want to get to 90 in the world.
No, fair enough.
And I think the economics as well. The market was very young, so the economics of understanding how far you could build before it becomes uneconomical, and how you infill that space with, we'll say, wireless technology, which is has come on in leaps and bounds. And I think it's been slightly, people say it's been slightly watered down, the government ambition. It depends what way you look at it. The reality is that fibre will only get to a certain percentage of the country. That's just the realities of it. And either the government want to pay want to infill that as much as they can, but there's still 1% to 2% that is going to just fall outside of that bracket, and that'll be predominantly wireless, we'll assume, at that point.
Do you have a sort of sense, because you obviously would know the other altnets as they get called that are in this area, but if you look at all the plans that have sort of been scoped out, including yours, and what Openreach is doing and what City Fibre is doing, what are we looking at in terms of where this will end up coverage-wise without the kind of government being done?
The 85% target by the end of 2025 is definitely achievable now. The whole sector is actually building and delivering now. So there was definitely, before COVID, there was a lot of talk. We used to have some, talks about fibre to the press, more so than fibre to the home. But those days are well and truly over. Management teams have stood up, resources have been put in place to deliver, and its delivery is happening right across the board. I think, if you look at the volume of delivery that's happened, so that target of 85% fibre to the home, or a fibre connection being available to 85% of the homes, is definitely on.
Yep.
I think what's not crystal clear yet, and I think what's a challenge, is how Project Gigabit, which is the government intervention, how that's going to be actually deployed on the ground.
So this is the bit that's supposed to be for some of the other 15% that doesn't get...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's outside of existing operators or existing build programs. That's just not economically viable at the moment. But with government intervention, it can be made viable.
Yep.
But that procurement process is going on, and the challenge for we'll say the government DCMS that are handling is, of course, the challenge for DCMS is that operators' plans move, things change, priorities become different, and they're trying to work a dynamic purchasing system to help get the build done in those hard to reach areas. But a hard to reach area today could actually become viable tomorrow if with an operator, he could be building an area, we'll say a market town of 10,000 homes. The economics have been really good, the take up is really good, so now the outlying villages become economical to build.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a whole moving feast there around, and so it's a difficult one to match off.
Sort of virtuous spiral, and so much as once something becomes viable, then new things become viable as a consequence. So Giganet's an ISP.
ISP, yeah.
Are you sort of geographically constrained? Do you have certain parts of the country?
Nope. So we sell on a.
I don't think you do hitching.
Yeah,
I checked.
Geographically constrained. Well, in terms of our scale up at the moment, so traditionally we were a B2B business, right? And we can provide B2B coverage nationwide through a range of carriers, not just
B2B fixed.
Yeah, fixed. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of we'll say home broadband or as my kids call it, home Wi-Fi.
Because that's the only bit they care about.
Well, that's They don't care what pipe it comes in or how it comes into the home, as long as my Wi-Fi.
My kids do that as well. If they can't access, they say Wi-Fi's broken.
Yeah.
And I have to resist geeking out and go, well, it could be all sorts of factors.
So I think in terms of the Wi-Fi piece, what we're doing at the moment, we have to, because we're doing it on the basis of building our own core network, we have to scale it up. So we're live across about 45 locations today. But we are on target by April 2023 to be live in every location.
Is there a particular region where you're initially strongest?
Across the south of England, there's 27 locations, and then there's obviously the City Fibre national piece which are spinning up. So, like for example, we went live in Sheffield 2 weeks ago, and we're live in Leeds.
So the 2023 target, that's your own.
That's our own target,
and
that's an engineering. That's just all about engineering.
Yeah.
So that's us about putting the core network infrastructure.
So do you have a sort of firm? I know the kind of big guys talk about BT in particular. We're trying to get to 25 million premises by 2026. Is there anything like that Giganet has? Or?
So you won't read anything about us telling us how many premises we've built it, because we don't think that's relevant for people.
Yeah.
Because we have a target to build out to 300,000 homes of our own network, and we're on target for that. In fact, we're ahead of target. We're going to bring that in early, but it's more about us to get to be able to provide service and connect customers. So our target at the moment is to have 500,000 connections by June 26.
Okay.
And again, we believe that we'll beat that target, as we always do.
And those connections would be your own, or they could also be on...
Exactly. They'll be across.
Can we clarify that by what you mean by building out your own network?
Yeah.
So you'll be using wholesalers like Openreach and City Fibre.
Yeah.
But are you saying that you're actually sort of laying down your own fibre
Yes,
cables?
correct.
Right.
Yes, we have like large infrastructure being built in Wiltshire, Hampshire, Dorset, West Sussex.
And presumably everywhere you're doing that is duplicating coverage that one of Openreach or City Fibre already have. Is that right?
No. So we've selected areas where there is no fibre at the moment.
Right. Now, I was going to say, otherwise, why bother?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why some towns or some areas may drop off our build over time, because if somebody gets there before us,
So is that like a company policy to have a sort of we have to be the company that gets there first to sort of justify?
Well, that's when you talk about you mentioned with Ronan about gold rush. I'd say I'm not just sure about the gold yet. We'll see in 6-7 years, but it's definitely a rush.
Yeah.
And the idea is it's all about speed of deployment. That's what it is, and that's where the lull was before COVID, and then during the pandemic there was actually during the pandemic they seem to have got cadence into their build. And yes, so it's all about the rush. Build as quick as you can, get there first, build as quick as you can, and get customers on.
And then in those areas, so you mentioned Sussex, but are you using, there's no fibre there, but would you be able to use ducts that exist?
So there's this PIA product, the Physical Infrastructure Access product, which is a regulated product. So in other words, we can run our fibres through BT's assets, either on the poles or in their ducts. But we build our own chambers, for example. We put our own active equipment in cabinets on the side of the road. So we just use their infrastructure where it's possible. But we have to dig as well in a lot of places because the infrastructure just isn't there, or there's no capacity.
And has that got easier? Because sort of access to Openreach infrastructure used to be a big issue for a long time.
Oh yeah, that's come on a long way. It's come on a long way in terms of the way it's the whole process with Openreach on the PIA piece, and of course it could always be improved and be quicker and slicker and all that. But it works.
But I imagine dealing with them is quite different from dealing with City Fibre, because the kind of products they sell are quite different, aren't they?
Yeah.
So BT doesn't really sell a dark fibre.
Yeah,
as far as I'm aware.
And I think they're City Fibre are they've got that still got that startup mentality.
Yep.
They're way more agile in terms of, you can have any conversation with any layer of management in there. It's a bit more difficult in Openreach. They are, Openreach are good at what they do as well, but I think it's when you're a young business growing like us, and you need quick responses, and you need to kind of get into a room and figure it out. That's not that easy with Openreach, whereas with City Fibre it's instant in terms of, because we're both trying to find that hallowed ground of perfection.
It's interesting, that challenger mentality, because Greg Mesh, is that his
Yes,
surname?
yeah.
I remember years ago I was taking a piss out of him because he used to really give it large with the sort of challenger sort of gobshite stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not, I don't criticise it intrinsically, but if you're going to stick your head above the trench, then
he'd probably be up for that sort of comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, he came to a Telecoms.com live event in 2019.
He was almost headlining it.
Yeah, well, he was definitely, I think, one of the star speakers, and I got no sense of butthurt from him. But it could just be that he's so professional that he wouldn't be stupid enough to show it.
Yeah, I think he's pretty thick-skinned.
Yeah. And as I said, he's backed it up with actions.
Yeah, well, but one thing I was just going to note is in the past few years, certainly during and after the pandemic, which isn't it amazing how that's just become a sort of milestone
anchor.
Yeah, it's like pre and post. It's like fucking BC and AD.
Before coronavirus.
Yeah, before Corona. There we are.
Yeah, well.
We just have to think of an AD one after dicking about.
Dicking about, I like that.
But yeah, certainly in the last couple of years, it's interesting to see how, and presumably he's strategic and he's thought about it. Presumably he could have still been giving it large like he did in the latter half of the last decade. But now that they've moved on to this, they're fully, they've got all this Goldman Sachs money, they've got all this money for everyone else, they've just raised a shitload of debt.
Yep.
And as you say, they're fully costed or funded or whatever they call it.
But like you say, from a sort of infrastructure investor's perspective, it's not so different from what you saw going on with, the railroads in America a long time ago. They're going to be there with Ronan was saying, there's the fibre optic infrastructure itself. Given how easy it is to sort of maintain and it doesn't damage easily, and it theoretically could be there for 100 years. There's nothing coming along that people are saying will mean that needs to be stripped out, and we'll need to do the same kind of replacement of from copper to fibre that we're doing now.
Absolutely, it's really only the technology at either end, which is obviously happy days for Ronan and his colleagues.
So to me, it almost seems a bit like. I can say this because I'm a journalist, but Openreach sort of they were really too slow, I think, moving into fibre. They messed around for a long time. They had a former CEO who was more focused, it seemed, on wanting to get into the sports business and and
get on Baywatch.
Yeah. But I just think that when they look back on this, in a few years' time, and I've written a few articles about this, sort of predicting that they probably are going to lose a fair amount of market share, because if they don't, then something's gone badly wrong with all of these other altnet investments.
Yeah.
And the market on the whole.
So they're probably going to lose quite a bit of market share, and you kind of feel that they could have prevented that to some extent if they'd been a bit more. I mean, it's easy to say in retrespect, isn't it? It's not like if I'd been at BT, I'd have gone, well, we should be investing in fibre because this is the way it's all going to go. But it was just a bad call, really.
Well, the other thing, sorry, just very quickly, I'll hand it over to you, Jarlath. I remember writing about a time, and there was just they've got that dilemma of sweating their assets, haven't they? They got all that copper, so they were banging on about G-fast or G.fast, depending on where you are in the great dot ideological schism. And I remember, I think earlier on in my career here, when I was still trying to get my head around everything, they're banging on about this. I was just wondering, what the hell is it? And I sort of eventually realised it's just a way of sort of tarting up copper, which I'm sure is the way their marketing people described it. And so they had that sweating their assets thing. And so that optimal point at which you stop sweating your legacy assets and just go, fuck it. All right, now we're looking to the future. I mean, there's all these little business cliches you have, like Kodak.
Yeah.
They sweated their film assets for too long. Yeah. They actually had loads of digital photography tech, but they sat on it because there were too many people within the company who had.
But they've got to get that balance right between sweating the assets and spotting something that's going to be completely.
And so my point is, I'm kind of agreeing with you. They probably took too long over that. What were you going to say?
No, it's a massive decision because you have this network, this copper network, and deploying fibre is capital intensive. It's not an easy decision to bring to the boardroom for a business like to say, guess what, let's deploy fibre. When people say, well, can we not sweat this other stuff a bit more? And that's not just in telecoms, that's across any business really.
Because in terms of the annual numbers, there's no immediate ROI. Yeah. So you're asking investors, shareholders, board members to just be patient.
I think they have no choice because they know if they don't do it, they're really in a bad position. And therefore, all the numbers at BT don't look very nice at the moment. It's like flat revenues. I think capital intensity is now at 25%, which is really high for a service provider. I think they've restored dividends, but for a while those went. And,
And does a CEO get any credit for something that's actually going to come to fruition in a decade or two's time?
If he survives, yes.
If he does. Well, you're CEO.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're familiar with this thought process.
I think you're right in terms of the fibre. Like it was, in businesses in the past, it would have been a 3 or 5 year business plan. You would have been funded for that 3 or 5, especially private equity. And that's why we're really lucky with our investors. It's the first time I ever seen a spreadsheet with so many lines to the right. There was a 10-year plan and then a 30-year horizon.
Patient capital.
And it was like, wow. Okay, this is this means these people are in it for the long haul, and that changes the whole mindset about your decision making as well. And you need to make some really smart decisions here in terms of how you deploy, how you set up, what the proposition is, because this is a long grind. There's no quick, and that's why I laugh a small bit when I hear people talk about the gold rush, and because I think it depends on what your definition of rush is. I think it's I think this is a long play.
We should call it a gold stroll.
Yeah, the gold stroll. But I obviously there will be consolidation. There's that's de facto. There has to be consolidation, and that is going to happen. It'll probably there's been small little bits of it so far, but on a mass scale, probably the next 2 to 3 years. But I think what that consolidation looks like, because a lot of these assets won't have proven out their true value, because the customer connections won't be there, because the whole fibre adoption pieces.
But it's interesting, the consolidation thing, because that 85% that's being served by the private sector, I mean, an ideal situation from a consumer perspective and presumably from a regulatory perspective is that we go from this situation we've had in the past where one company does the whole market to having proper infrastructure competition. But at the same time, overbuild, as they call it, I think that's the word, isn't it, that they use for 2 fibre lines serving the same area. It can sound economically wasteful, and obviously one company's not going to be making money off a particular premises. So I'm just wondering what your feeling is about where it could end up.
I think there's different ways of looking at it. I think from my own knowledge of what's going on out there, the amount of overbuild that's happening between altnets is kind of it's not material, or at least on the face of it, it's not material. There's only one real overbuilder, and that's Openreach. Because they are going to build everywhere. So if you're talking about who's the overbuilder,
so they're going to get to places after a lot of these altnets have already arrived.
And like a City, but I think what City Fibre have done, because they're an open access player, I think the customer is still going to win, because you will have Openreach, open access player. You'll have City Fibre as an open access player, and you probably will have one other. That's, again, this is a personal view of the world. That creates massive competition, because on those open access players there can be multiple ISPs. So you're not even though there's going to be consolidation, you're not going to lose ISPs. In fact, you'll probably find there'll be more ISPs. Right, so you have the TalkTalks, Vodafones, the Zens, we'll say, some of the Sky obviously being the biggest, and you have Virgin, and it's still unclear. Virgin say they're going to build out a fibre network, but it's still unclear what exactly their strategy is.
And they've not really started yet doing
that. Again, not to my knowledge anyway, of any great scale. So it'll be really interesting to see, because I think the consumer will be the winner, but I think it's really important that in this early stage that government and regulation support the alternative networks. In terms of the right type of regulation, and ensure that they let them flourish, because BT can't do it on their own, as in BT Openreach can't do it on their own. City Fibre can't do it on their own. So you need all this mix, and then the consolidation to happen in a proper process. Now, this is of course the ideal world. Things don't happen like that, as we know. But I think, and that will create the right environment, because at the end of the day, it's all about what the customer is going to experience.
Do you think that from a regulatory perspective, the best thing is sort of making it easy for people to build? Which always comes up in mobile, that it's not easy necessarily to get access to sites, but also just staying out of the way a little bit on the pricing side and not trying to interfere too much. I know City Fibre has been quite critical of them weighing in and saying, well, Openreach should have to provide dark fibre and it should do it at these rates.
And it's a fine line. Like Ofcom don't have an easy job either. Let's just say, you know, they could do things better, but they don't have an easy job either, because it's a delicate balance. Because at the end of the day, their only interest is the end user, the customer, and behind all that, they have to balance it off between what's best to allow Openreach to have a business case versus the alternative market. How do the alternative operators also make it economically viable to build? And that's where Project Gigabit is being balanced at the moment. But then in terms of the products that are available from Openreach, so what products can you use? So us as Giganet, what products can we use from Openreach that will enable us to give the end user a competitive Wi-Fi service in their home? And that's it's not clear cut.
No, there's a lot of nuance in it.
A lot of nuance.
And nuance isn't very fashionable these days.
I wish someone would do it in my neighbourhood, because I still can't get full fibre, I don't think.
Really?
And I'm in sort of southwest London.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
It's not like you're in the middle of nowhere.
Swaffield Road, I don't think there's...
Don't you two live near each other?
Well, the London market is hot. You have community fibre, you have G Networks.
Well, G Network was going down Garrett Lane, but then I checked to see if they were doing it on Swaffield Road, which is up from that, and they hadn't sort of got to me.
People know where you live now. We might get stalkers.
Chance of
What's the last three?
Pierre's going to look out for me and tell me.
While you're doing that, I've got a couple of questions for you, Charlie.
Obviously,
you just have to
AQ.
hope that when he does the post-production, he amplifies me over whatever prattle he's doing. We were talking about overbuilding, and earlier on you were talking about the stuff that Giganet's building for itself, and it's focusing on places where the other guys haven't. Mm-hmm. The question about that I've got is, isn't that a bit... Right, if they haven't gone there, isn't it because they've made a business decision that it's not worth it? And aren't you therefore going for less favourable areas?
That's not necessarily the way the plans, the original plans are built up, if that makes sense. So remember, like to build a business plan and say you're going to deliver 300,000 or 400,000 homes, you need 250 to 300 million investment. So our investment was 250 million. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the altnet market, there isn't that many players that have got that type of money. Yeah. There's a lot of players around 20 to 50 million, stuff like that, and they're trying to prove out business cases. They're using government subsidies to infill and all that sort of stuff. So it's like there wasn't enough of people to get to some of these places.
No, but I'm talking about the ones who've got tons of money, i.e. the incumbents. And it's funny, actually, especially given your background, how infrequently Virgin Media comes up in this. I don't know why. Perhaps you can explain it. But Openreach and City Fibre, they've got plenty of money. City Fibre from investment, Openreach from being the incumbent.
Yeah.
So that's my question: is if City Fibre and Openreach and Virgin have decided not to bother, presumably there's a reason.
Well, okay. So just to take that point, then, if you take some of our build, for example, so we will sell in City Fibre in Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole, right, in those three locations, and we have targeted City Fibre. Obviously, the clue is in the name; they just build in cities, or so-called cities, and then we have decided to build in Ferndown, Ringwood, and Wimborne, which is on the extremities of that. Right. So they were kind of like, within reach of where we will be selling on City Fibre, and we would have targeted those. That doesn't mean somebody else wouldn't look at that as well, but again, if we get there first to these locations, it's usually a deterrent for another altnet, because it would be for us anyway. If we turned up and there's another altnet there, we usually wouldn't look to overbuild them, because the economics don't work.
And I suppose the other people haven't done it not necessarily because it's a really bad idea, but just because everyone's got a limit on what they're going to do, and they've had to prioritise. And exactly. What you're basically doing is sorry, I'm putting words into your mouth, but for you to correct me if I've got it wrong, is you're you're acting like a really efficient market, and you're going, I've noticed bits of this market that are deficient or have overlooked these bits, and we're stepping in. We're being opportunistic. We're going,
and that's what the altnet market has done.
Yeah.
Outside of City Fibre, because that's a different animal. Because that like I said, focused on cities, pure wholesale. But the altnet market is focused on that opportunist piece of saying there's nobody here. If we get there first, we can get a first mover.
So one scenario is, if we look.
Sorry, Ian, can I just butt in, because Pierre did that thing that you were just looking at. What did you find out about where you live?
You can get Giganet at your home.
Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, there you
Fancy that.
Half a gig.
The bribing's only just started.
Wasn't that convenient?
And I checked, and so can I.
It'd be you buying him a bottle of Irish whiskey next.
I mean, I just picked number 33. I don't know where you live on the street, but
48.
okay, I'll check. I'll
Well,
double check.
now you've got a precise stalker.
Yeah, no.
But I was just thinking one scenario. If you look in the future and the competitive landscape looks, it could be likely that we see. Let's say City Fibre remains its own thing because it's got very sort of expansive coverage plans, and Openreach is obviously the incumbent and he's going for 26 million premises or whatever, it's 25 million. But the other altnets, if we get a consolidation among them, it might almost mean piecing together bits of a network that, like putting a jigsaw puzzle together almost to form another national network.
Yeah, you're spot on.
Ideally,
It's spot on, absolutely. And again, in terms of the consolidation, that's no matter where you look in the country at the minute, it's nearly all connected, or at least they're bumping up against each other. So obviously different specifications in certain areas, different technology, etc. But the end product is by and large the same.
Yeah.
So the consolidation can happen at a large scale basis when it needs to. But yes, there's interconnected networks, and that's why I personally feel there probably is room for one more. So BT, we'll say, Openreach, City Fibre, and probably one more. Now again, you mentioned about Virgin.
Yeah, why don't we talk about them more?
Well,
I mean, they've been involved in fixed line for decades,
and I suppose it's a strange scenario, because again, back to, and I know Rona went into the detail on the technical side in terms of sweating out their existing coaxial play and stuff like that. And I suppose it's that hard decision.
So you were there. What was it called back in the day?
Cable and Wireless originally,
and
Cable and Wireless, then Telewest in London.
There we go.
Then NTL, and then
and all that ended up turning into Virgin Media.
In
but that was all obviously pre-fibre back then.
Yeah, it was all. Yeah, it's or pre-fibre or pre-broadband. Really, it was just a telephone and TV, the good old set-top.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, and I might be wrong,
of course, the set-top box thing.
There's not a lot of fibre in Virgin. Virgin's build-out at the moment is heavily based on DOCSIS 3, I think.
That's correct.
So the amount of FTTP stuff which they are looking at, but I don't think it's a huge number of premises.
So I'm just showing my ignorance / assumptions.
They have this plan to go completely from DOCSIS to FTTP.
They made an announcement.
What's the standard? Not G. You confuse me. Or G. GPON.
XGS-PON.
XGS-PON it will be by I think, but it's quite a long transition. It's late 2020s. They're talking about doing it. Completely. So,
but that's still if they're mainly not PON.
They're mainly not PON,
Switching from not PON to PON, i.e. not fibre to fibre.
And it was quite
a
it
massive,
was one of those announcements that sort of shook up the market a bit, I think, because the cable industry was like, I don't know, we're still good enough to be around for a long, long time. And yet you have one of the biggest cable players in Europe going, well, we're actually thinking of moving out of that technology.
I just noticed, I'm going to butt in. So, I'm going to give Light Reading a little plug, because one of your colleagues got in touch to flag up a couple of webinars that Light Reading's doing on the fixed line side. I think it was Alan.
Yep.
And I went to sign up to them. I noticed there's two. There's like a DOCSIS one, a cabley one, because they're a bit more.
He's the cable man, Alan.
And they're a bit more. They're a bit more cabley in the States, anyway.
Yeah.
And then there's the PON one, the fibre one, and I just thought it was interesting that they seem to give equal weighting to both, because in my mind, certainly since the podcast we've had with Neil from BT and Ronan from Adtran, I've turned into just a fibre snob. I don't even want to fucking talk about not fibre.
Well, cable's big though in parts of the world.
But you're right in terms of, people always say to me, well, what is the difference? And I always say to them, well, have you driven an electric car? I think if you've driven an electric car, you'll get it, because I think...
I haven't. Have you?
Yeah, and I think even though
I'm about to buy a new car, but it's not electric.
There's two cars side by side. One is petrol, one is electric. The experience of driving the electric is just fundamentally different. And I think the experience between fibre and anything else, let it be coaxial or let it be copper, is just fundamentally different. And I think that's probably the best explanation I could give you. But you should drive an electric car.
I should have, if only I had the money. I'm not going to go into what my ceiling is on the new car. I'm only buying a new car because my old car started properly acting up.
But you can pretend and just get a test drive, I'm saying.
Or I could just get my kids to sit in the back and make a buzzy noise.
You have a Ford Focus, right?
I've got Ford Focus. I think I'm going to go Focus again just because for the amount of money I want to spend, which is less than 10 grand, it's just, for obviously second hand, it just seems like a known quantity. Skoda. You're saying Skoda. Is that what you got? Skoda? Skoda what?
A Volkswagen. Octavia.
Right. Right. I've more or less committed to a Focus now. But anyway, I had one other thing. Yes. Just on the ISP side. So back to what we were just talking about a minute ago with the full fibre, once you've gone there, you won't ever go back type of thing. Sounds slightly sordid, doesn't it? I'm just wondering about the demand side. So we've spoken almost entirely sort of supply side and the industry so far. Demand side. So I've got whatever I've got. I'm on EE. I'm pretty sure I don't have full fibre. I certainly don't think I'm paying for it. And I get something like 50 megabits per second or something like that.
I think 76 is the top one if it's not full fibre.
Right. Okay. Like so let's say somewhere in the mid tens. On the separately, I guess, on the consumer and the B2B side, how much demand is there? I mean, if I'm all right, I can still do my stuff. My son can still play on the PlayStation. Yep. We can stream Netflix and all that kind of thing on whatever fairly vanilla bog standard broadband I've got now. Talk to me a little bit about, there's all this investment, there's all this patient capital. That's something I didn't quite touch on, but we touched on it in previous pods. The remarkable thing is this patient capital, this capital that will wait decades for their ROI, which is not what VCs are known for, is it?
Yeah.
But the other economic thing, again, which we've touched on in previous pods, is, like right now with investment markets going down the toilet, I mean, especially with each passing week, it just gets a bit more scary, doesn't it? You don't want to look at your portfolio, do you, Pierre?
This is all cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Oh God, no, that's the worst.
Can you imagine?
Haven't you been following it? Crypto's car crash.
No, my son's got a load of money in crypto.
No, not anymore. He doesn't.
No, not anymore.
Wow. Now he's got pennies. Anyway. So it's a weird sort of, and bonds are weird and all that sort of thing, and things like infrastructure have suddenly become like a form of general asset. But anyway, steer it back to the point I was trying to make. Why, for me, it's not obvious why I should pay a premium to go from my, let's say, 50 megabits per second I get now to 10 times that.
Well, you probably won't have to pay a premium.
Yeah, well,
is that what it is?
But that is the challenge. I think at the minute, for us as at the ISP end, it's the whole educational piece for people. Back to your point. So during COVID was a really good test of the copper infrastructure. People that had 60, 80 meg or whatever it is in their home, and it stood up.
You sound like you say that like it's shit. I feel really bad now.
Yeah, well, but it stood up. It stood up. It kept people connected. It kept people. It probably saved a lot of people from lonely times and everything else. So when you do knock the door now and say, "Hey, do you want to sign up to fibre?" and they're kind of saying, "Well,
I'm all right." Okay, so to my point,
it worked. And so I think there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. From a business point of view, it's labour intensive to get out there and sell it. So you have to go back to the old way of doing it. You have to knock doors. It's not like a pure digital player where you can just sit back and they roll in. You get a certain percentage of people nowadays that are savvy in terms of being able to order through the website. But predominantly our sales will come from physically knocking doors. That's the reality.
Which, as you say, is labour intensive and expensive.
It's labour intensive and expensive. But there's also an element of obviously belief in ourselves as a business that technology. So having the fibre there enables people to come up with new stuff like gaming or anything else. Gaming wouldn't be where it is today only for some really good fibre infrastructure and the ability to be able to operate at those sort of speeds and latency and everything else. So we always firmly believe that there's stuff will come along that will actually naturally get people to understand that anything less than 100 meg is going to be no good anymore. The amount of devices that's connected to your
Which is
home.
inevitable eventually.
Well, but it might be sooner than you think, because like if you take you would be surprised when we get all sorts of research done and looking at people's homes, and when you talk to people and try and talk to them about how many devices they've actually connected in their homes, and like when you go down through the list, there's about 30 different devices.
It's mental.
And they go, God, I never knew that. And then you start looking at, well, any sort of upgrade in those devices, like even cameras to go from, into high definition, stuff like that, or more of them, or Ring doorbells, all this sort of stuff. And then the pressure's going to start coming on.
And that's the interesting education piece, isn't it? Because like the other day, I was watching Netflix with my wife and it started doing the swirly thing.
Yeah.
And we have these sort of first world problems. We're like, oh, fucking hell. What a nightmare.
I'm surprised people... I mean, from a consumer perspective, I want to have all fibre. In fact, now that I've noticed there's Giganet, I have to go and have a look. But because...
Will you get onto their customer? I was just chatting to your CEO the other day.
It's just better. And and you were saying you're worried about... If I had to go and find a service and they're going to say, well, you're paying... 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever you're paying at the moment per month, I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
Because it includes some TV. But if they were to say, well, we're going to have to spend 70 or 80 quid to get it, I'd be like, well, no way, that's not worth it, because I don't really have any service problems on Netflix, and occasionally the same with you, or if everybody's on at the same time.
Yeah.
But they're probably not, because there's so much competition in the market at the moment. I don't think BT's full fibre offers are that expensive. They're not charging a lot more than they charge.
Ours are extremely competitive. Like we have a flat four price structure across the country for 150, 300, 500 and a gig.
Yeah.
And the dearest one is £40 per month. So it's
40 quid for a gig.
Yeah, which is really competitive. But
why wouldn't you spend the same amount to get more?
I think it's back to the point about the educational piece. So it's back to the point where the kids say my Wi-Fi isn't working. It's kind of the end user doesn't on the whole doesn't understand where it comes from and what the difference is. So that's where we're going to have to be labour intensive over these next 3 to 5 years, and hopefully we have some technology to help that as well. So maybe it's an 8K TV, or maybe it's a 16K TV, or whatever. That's something that is a driver. And if you look at the mobile market, I always talk about you look at how the iPhone drove the mobile market.
Yeah, totally.
And fibre hasn't had that moment yet. There hasn't been that iPhone moment in the fibre to the home piece.
Yep.
And obviously we all hope it comes.
I don't think it's going to be 16K TV.
We have to knock the door.
But it's coming a bit. I do notice service problems from time to time, and it's hard to tell what the problem is. It could be an Amazon issue. It could be, for some reason, live sport on Amazon Prime sometimes goes blurry when I'm trying to watch the tennis.
Yeah,
it sort of distorts a bit, but I don't know whether that's anything to do with the broadband.
Well, again, the in-home experience.
It's just saying, watch less tennis, you obsessive nutter.
And this is where the in-home experience, because you can have a gig in your hallway on a router, and then you go upstairs, or you go in the back of the house into another room, and it's crap. Yeah. So there's the other challenge, the whole in-home experience.
Are you finding? The gold rush, fibre rush phrase is, maybe it's more of a fibre stroll, but there's obviously a bit of pressure on, presumably, to get to these places before somebody else comes along.
That is,
you probably saw the article in the FT this week where Clive Selley was moaning about Brexit's made it harder to recruit staff, and are you finding, because you're trying to grow quite quickly, it sounds, are you finding it quite difficult to get people?
Yes.
Can I butt in on that particular one, because I wrote it up? That was a bullshit headline, because the Clive Selley quote didn't mention Brexit once.
That's right.
Right.
All he did was say that the way in which we're handling our immigration bureaucracy is bullshit.
Yeah. Well, and the FT writer obviously had some bias.
Or the sub-editor. The sub-editor.
Yeah.
But I had to call it out, and I've got my bias because I'm pro-Brexit, so I admit my own bias. But I just thought I just thought that was a really disingenuous bit of sub-editing. They made it about Brexit when all he's really doing was a slightly less sexy thing of just moaning about how many obstacles we put in the way.
For me, it's not about Brexit though, really. But certainly, if everybody's trying to build a lot of fibre, and I mean, you're noticing sort of it quite difficult.
Oh yeah, no, the market is really hot at the moment, and it's not just the civil engineering piece or the technical piece. It's right through the whole lot. You know, management, project management, operations management. It's really, really hot, and there's the competition is fierce at the moment. So you really have to think outside the box about how you keep your people. First of all, keep them, and then you know that they want to stay with you in the business. And for us, on a business that's grown so rapidly, you know, we've added like 140 odd people in 11 months. Yep. It's trying to make sure that they're still excited as they were the first day they came in, and you meet their expectations. And on top of that, now we've had a cost of living crisis thrown in on top of it, so you're trying to manage that whole process.
It's not an easy time to be in business at all.
No, it's not easy. And but you could take an optimistic view of the world and say the inflation crisis has peaked and it's going the other way. Obviously, what follows that is usually a recession. So we need to understand how that is and what it is. I think we're lucky. We've really good patient investors, and they believe in the story, and they'll be around for the long haul. But it is a difficult job for resourcing at the moment. There's no two ways about that.
Are there any sort of worries on a few of the companies that supply optical equipment and other bits and pieces that go into these networks have started making a bit more of a fuss recently about how difficult it is to get components? And I mean, I know that story's gone on for a year, but are you seeing any signs?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like I was just on a call before I came in, Friday call where we're looking at risks and stuff, and items we were expecting to come in August have now been pushed to April 23. Shit, right? Just like that.
That's 9 months.
Mm. Yeah. And that's not untypical at the moment now, because and it's there doesn't seem to be we often are used to shortages within the industry, but you'd get a roadmap or a plan out of it. Yeah. There isn't one of them. Don't exist at the minute because they really don't know, and they're trying to manage. And then you usually don't get the quantity you're expecting because there's load balancing going on within the industry, so that everybody gets something. So it is real. There's loads of that going on. So it isn't clear cut, but it is what it is. You just have to plan it as well as you can.
I've got one more thing, and then if it's all right with you two, I might sort of move it on. Just cover a couple of other. Yeah, go for it, mate. What's that? That's Pierre's one. You got
as he's running off with a bottle, I'm going to drink the rest of this what's in a glass.
That was, by the way, for those not watching, Ian was just surreptitiously scraping a glass of Irish whiskey towards himself. We were talking a little bit earlier. I mean, I don't want to use sort of cliche terms like killer app, but you were talking about like 8K, 16K TV, which I'm sceptical about, partly because you get to the point where you can't even fucking tell the difference. And Ian, I can't remember, you were coming out with some use case, some personal use case, which may or may not have some resonance. But yeah, back to my sort of previous question about why should I pay the premium if indeed there is a premium. And by the way, actually, there was one shitty question I wanted to ask you when you said that you got a gig service. How often does someone actually get a gig?
Well, it's 900 meg. Sorry, it's 900 meg.
All right, but do they actually get it? Because this isn't just me being unpleasant to you. This is the whole industry. I mean, I've been writing stories for years about the advertising standards authority having a go at things like up to. Yeah. And all these sort of weird marketing claims.
Well, you'll get 900 wired to the router at right. Wired direct to the
That's
router.
The commitment,
but on Wi-Fi, we will call out what the speed will be. You know what I mean in terms of.
Do you provide your own hotspots, your own Wi-Fi?
So we we provide our own routers, and the app that you'll be able to run your own speed test and what it is to make sure that it's.
Because there's a big interest for you in that, because in terms of like customer complaints.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I think it's no different than people advertising fibre that's not fibre. It's fibre to the cabinet, and then there's copper to the house, and of course that doesn't help our industry either.
No,
people say,
over-promising.
I've got fibre. And you're saying, well, you don't really.
I was going to ask a stupid question potentially, because my copy editor mentioned it this morning, because he lives in the Isle of Wight, and I think
Shout out to Paul.
White Fibre, Paul Rainford, yeah. He said, ask him this, because White Fibre, I think, is one of the altnets that's obviously dealing with and he was saying, we've got a lot of trenching going on at the moment in front of the buildings, but he says, but nobody ever comes right up to the actual house. So what's the bit that goes to the actual, into your home itself?
Good question.
So there's
It's not a stupid question, Ian.
Okay.
No, so
and I couldn't really answer it for him.
Yeah, so when you build a network, you build what's called a homes pass network.
Yep.
So effectively, you put in, you can, whatever terms you use, everybody uses different terms, but it's like a trunk network, the transmission, whatever term you want to put on it, and it usually comes to the curtilage or to your front garden.
Did you say cartilage?
Cartilage.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
I've never heard that.
So
in this context.
it can be a curb, the curb. It can be the garden wall. It can be whatever it is. That's from that point. Then it's called a drop connection.
Yeah.
And the drop connection is when you ring up an order or you order to the website, and the guys come in their lovely Giganet uniforms and say, where would you like it?
With their Giganet rucksacks like we've got now.
Exactly, all that stuff. And that's an installation piece which typically shouldn't involve any more civils activity. It means we may have to bring it up through your garden, tack it to a wall, or there's different methods on how you'd bring it into the house. But that's actually called a drop connection, and that's a different skill set again. In terms of, because it's about speed of deployment. So you want to get the home passed, and then you want to be able to offer it to whoever, because not everybody will take it up anyway. So that's the way the network is built at the moment.
I'll make sure Paul watches this.
Yes, so you don't have to explain it to him. Okay, it seems like a good moment to sort of move it on to other bits and bobs. The other thing, in fact, I just remember, Pierre, at the start, I didn't give you any opportunity to do the little captions, but I've noticed you've stopped bothering with that.
When we have guests, sometimes it's
just too fluid.
Too focused on one topic.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's fine. But an obvious other thing to talk about is, there's a couple of events this week, but the main one I want to talk about is an Informer event which was called the Edge event.
Well, there were two.
Oh, right.
They were co-located.
Oh, were
they?
An
industry expression.
Well, anyway, so I'll finish and then you can correct me. So I was going to go, but then I suddenly forgot I had a conflicting appointment. But Andrew went from Telecoms.com and you went. Oh, actually, Andrew and Armita went from Telecoms.com.
Yeah, so Armita
and you went. So what was all that about?
So there was the Edge event, and then there was next to that one called Private Networks in a 5G World. I think I might have got the title wrong, but it was basically about private 5G enterprise networks.
Right, so which is also very buzzy.
Quite similar things.
Shout out to Pablo Tomasi, the analyst.
Yeah. Why are we shouting him out?
Because he's all about
he's
that.
the expert on private 5G enterprise.
Okay.
They're obviously very, very related, but a little bit different. I mean, the Edge event was very much from a telco perspective. How do telcos fit into the Edge, really? Whereas I think when it comes to private 5G, it's not clear necessarily that they always will. But yeah, it was. I mean, I didn't go into a lot of the private 5G stuff because I thought it's better just to try and focus on one thing.
Cool.
So
well, that's just as well because the segment I've got after this is going to talk about private 5G, so you're not stealing my thunder.
Okay. Yeah.
But so that event, it was. Did you just go for the one day?
No, I went both days.
Oh, you went both days?
Yeah.
I think my team only went for the one day.
Well, I went out with Andrew after the first day, and we both said we're probably not going to come back tomorrow.
And then you did.
And then I woke up the next day.
Love it.
Well, I just thought there's nothing really going on, and sometimes I have like a backlog of things to do, and I'm going through a bit of a quiet phase at the moment. So I thought, well, it's easier for me because he's in St Albans, so I might as well. It's 3 stops on the train, I might as well go in. So I went. I'm glad I went in on the second day. There was some good stuff there.
Give us some highlights.
I mean, it's kind of chicken and egg. Or
what's the best thing?
I'm trying to sum up the theme, but for me, it's.
I'll shut up.
It's kind of. It's still a bit of a catch-22, I think, the Edge, because the application developers don't want to write applications for an Edge network that doesn't exist. And the operators don't want to build out an Edge network unless there's the applications to run on them.
God, that catch-22 has come up loads of times. I remember writing about that in a smartphone context. Like with operating systems, I remember, this is like 15 years ago, when there was still when we didn't have the established smartphone OS duopoly we have now. And the problem we always had, like I think BlackBerry was trying to get into a more full smartphone thing, but the problem they always had was, do you have the developer install base?
Yeah.
And if you don't have the developer install base, then why would you have the end user install base? But then you don't get the end user install base, and that's the developer, and so you get this catch-22 going on.
It's a leap of faith. Then.
Yeah, and I think in some cases, operators have been willing to...
some Irish whiskey as well.
Like fibre's maybe an example. People are willing to build out fibre networks because there's an expectation that there will be future demand and that applications will come that sort of justify that investment. And to me, that sounds...
It's a great Kevin Costner movie.
It sounds fairly...
If you build it.
Yeah. But that sounds like a relatively safe bet given what's happened with internet traffic. You can sort of extrapolate and say, well, that's a fairly sensible thing to do. Whether the actual operators are making a lot of money from it's another question. I mean, 5G is similar. The levels of mobile data traffic sort of justify, you could say, spending money on 5G. But I think the edge is quite different because a lot of these use cases that are being presented about, we need privacy requirements, or data sovereignty is important, or the classic ones, latency. What is that bit in the triangle, the 5G triangle?
Low latency.
Low latency. The trouble with the whole low latency thing is that there aren't really the applications at the moment to justify having, and also no one really knows.
What, not even VR walking around in the street?
and no one really knows what the... You're trying to sort of imagine how the future network might look. No one really seems to have a very clear idea of how it's going to end up. You talk to some operators and they're talking about re-architecting their network so they've got maybe hundreds of edge data centres all across a country the size of the UK, and then others say, realistically, we can probably do it with 5 or 6, given what's happening in the applications market, and we can get down to below 20 milliseconds with that, and that's enough. And so it's just nothing's really moved on. I mean, what they don't want to do is go and build this very, very expensive edge network where you're turning central offices and street cabinets into potential edge sites. Because Facebook is talking about the metaverse and saying that we need...
That was the use case I was thinking of earlier that you said, the metaverse.
Well, the metaverse is potentially, or VR and AR, let's say. I mean, I know everybody laughs about it because it's a bit of a joke.
It's easy to take the piss out of it.
It's easy to take the piss out, but it is probably the closest thing you can imagine to being a mass market edge service, really. VR gaming, which is what the metaverse is really, that and social interactions in a sort of VR world. From a consumer,
as much as we know
I know that sort of thing's going on already in a factory environment to some extent, using extended reality to do clever stuff.
Yeah.
But for it to be a mass market service, let's say in the future our kids are, when they're in their mid-20s, 30s, they're at home playing games and having conversations with people in other parts of the world using VR headsets and having meetings, doing all that sort of stuff. That's probably the most imaginable thing, and it probably will require a big investment in edge facilities if you believe people like Dan Rabinovitz, I think he's called. He's one of the top sort of engineers at Facebook. He's saying you need sort of millisecond level latency to do it. But the trouble is, if the operators go and it's a huge investment the operators then have to go and make, and who's going to make the money from it? That's the problem. Because they don't tend to make money from applications. So it just sounds like a huge amount of data traffic and a big investment that profits big tech. And this is why we have all these conversations going on at the moment in Europe about who needs to pay for networks and net neutrality.
And I think the mobile sector is definitely struggling a lot from even the 5G experiences. The whole monetization of that has definitely been challenging without a doubt. And if you look at the fibre industry and the copper industry, it's not too dissimilar type of, who is going to be the one that's going to make the decision to say, okay, let's do it, and and the business case is 25, 30 years to the right. That it's these are big decisions,
and a lot of the time, back to the thing we were just talking about a few minutes ago, it's that use case. That's why these cliches like killer app come up. Because, I get it, not wanting to go back to our previous conversation, but I get it that with fibre, there doesn't need to be a killer app at this stage because there's patient capital, because there's a certain momentum and inevitability about it. But
there's also a cost-saving argument with fibre because it's cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of other things, but 16K video isn't a killer app as far as I'm concerned. Metaverse isn't a killer app, and that's fine. But then when you get into Edge and 5G on the whole, and funnily enough, I've just been my colleague Armit has been writing up this 5G survey that we did, and one of the things that comes up is here we are in 2022 with 5G. What's the case in favour of it? And the case in favour of it still isn't that strong, as we often talk about on this pod.
Yeah.
We don't celebrate that. Obviously, we don't want the telecoms industry to struggle too much because it pays our fucking mortgage. Yeah. But then we're also journalists, and it's incumbent on us to sort of drunkenly take the piss every now and then.
But the trouble with not making this gets to your point, and this gets to the whole fibre thing that I was saying about OpenReach earlier, that they probably delayed a decision longer than they should have done, I think, in retrospect. And nobody wants to be in a position 10 years from now where all of a sudden one operator has built out an edge network that's looking quite extensive and is able to support really low. And then you get applications coming along that justify that investment, and even if they're not making direct money from that, where a customer's going to go if there's a killer application that it just even if it's just connectivity for the operators, and you're on a network that doesn't support that very well, you're in big trouble. Yeah. So that's why they're still talking about it a lot, I suppose. And
so the interesting thing, like the company we're part of. So this was an Informa event, wasn't it? The Edge one.
Yeah.
So the company we're part of, we're the journalistic, or one of the journalistic manifestations of Informa, and then we've got colleagues like Dario, who was on recently. Was it the last pod we published or the one before? Anyway,
2 ago.
Oh yeah.
William was on the last.
William, sorry, William, I forgot.
They're basically the same. Both mobile.
And then they have events like this, and of course events like this, rely on there being some degree of buzz, some degree of enthusiasm, some degree of business interest in that sector. But back to the point I've been labouring for a couple of questions now. You do sometimes get, from a journalist point of view, so one real privilege as journalists is you're the recipient of incoming propaganda. And I do view it as propaganda, but I don't even mean that in a pejorative way. It's the job of people like your marketing department. It's the job of people like your excellent PR agency who set this up. It's the job of all these people to obviously paint a certain picture, and then it's part of our job to interpret that incoming stuff and go, to what extent are they talking shit, or to what extent is the hyperbole that they're inevitably going to send us justified. And then if we think it's totally unjustified, then we'll sometimes tear it to pieces, which can, as we were talking about before the pod, lead to fractious relationships. But yeah, I just think this, a lot of the incoming propaganda or marketing, to put it a kinder label to it, that I get is these use cases, because we need this because of this.
Yeah,
we need this because of this. And I suspect Edge, and I wasn't at the event, so correct me if you agree or whether you think I've just gone off on a pointless tangent. But I suspect Edge is at that stage where they're still groping for some of those killer use cases.
They are, yeah. I mean, there was one panel on the killer app for the Edge, and the conclusion of that really was that there isn't one yet. I mean, some of the justification seems to be... There were some people arguing that you could maybe justify it on, which I find quite interesting, is that if you can combine several use cases... And Orange has talked about doing this, I think, as well, with things like not really open RAN, but the virtualized RAN, where you're using mini data centers to host some of your computing equipment that you need for the radio access network. You could sort of double up and have that used also for hosting some of the applications and doing some of the other stuff that you need, and then maybe you sort of justify the investment. So... But yeah, in terms of a killer app, there wasn't one. The thing I noticed that's different now, if you go to Edge events from 6 or 7 years ago, because I've been going to them for that long, it seems, is certainly the ones that are telco Edge events, is that the web guys are there. Big
AWS was there.
AWS was keynoting. There was a guy from AWS on who did the first keynote talking.
And we're often very unkind about AWS.
And this is the worry again for the telcos, is that they talked about the edge 6-7 years ago as something that where they had a big opportunity that big tech couldn't exploit, because they've got all this infrastructure in each country. They've got these central offices, they've got this sort of real estate that they can make use of, and and they own the networks, and it's something where they can, even though they lost out in other areas, this is an area where they can really profit and not just be connectivity players, but be the guys sort of who take this sort of leading role in the customer relationship. And the trend that I've noticed really over the last sort of certainly 3 or 4 years, with all these tie-ups between, which we talk about all the time, between the public cloud and telcos, is that big tech's just there more and more.
Yeah. And
then it becomes a question of, well, where do the telcos necessarily fit in at all? And I think certainly when it comes to the private 5G environment, which is a bit of that's the edge. That's putting something on an actual organisation's premises and using that to do factory automation or whatever and support something in that local environment. There are cases now where the telcos just won't be there. You'll get
increasingly
someone
so.
like AWS going in with outposts. Maybe they own their own spectrum. You can do that in Germany and other markets.
Well, we're going to come on to that as well.
And then there's just basically, there will be connectivity, but there's no real role for the telco. There's no real new role for it in a sort of edge context. And that's the concern for them, really, I think.
I mean,
sort of being sidelined. But
is this sort of thing, because you do B2B, obviously, as well, is this an ISP concern? And the ISPs get involved in things like edge and private networks and that sort of thing, or does that pass you by?
See, it's not an area that we have definitely got into anyway. That's for sure. And I don't think it's there. I think the demand is still there for transitioning hopefully from Ethernet to FTTP. So in terms of the whole offering, and it's hard to understand what the use case is for predominantly for the SME market that we serve.
Right.
It would be difficult to justify what would take them away from the normal type of...
But an SME typically, and obviously that's a broad range of headcount in an SME, but they typically wouldn't be looking to set up their own private network or their own... or getting into the edge game.
No, and like the only... I suppose examples is really around the manufacturing piece, small factories, automation, and whether or not building your own private network within that is better than relying on some of the big telcos.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely a challenge for the big telcos, is that are they going to be nimble enough to be able to serve that market long term.
Cool. That all makes sense. Anything else, Ian, from that event?
Those were my main takeaways. I mean,
what was AWS banging on about? Anything? Did you write that
AWS was giving. I did write it up, but not directly. I did it in a bigger piece.
Right, a roundup type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, they were talking about. They weren't trying to say they're not going to come to a telco event and say we're here to clean up and you guys just do connectivity. Yeah. So they were really sort of talking about their overall proposition. But it's interesting, out of all the different cloud and edge services that AWS offered, all its different products, from Outposts, which is the one it has where an enterprise might do it through wavelength, through to the kind of stuff that you do in big data centers.
They didn't have everything called a Monitron 2000.
They didn't talk about things like that, no. I know you'd have enjoyed that.
I loved that.
But the only one really that carves out a specific role for telcos is wavelength, which is the one where you're basically dropping compute and storage resources that AWS has into your 5G network. And they have a few big partners for that. They've got like SKT, I think, Docomo in Japan, and then Verizon and Vodafone, and the two big ones in the kind of Western world. And yet, I don't want to be critical of Vodafone, but they announced that service now about a year ago with that thing they're doing with AWS, and they did an update on it at the show. And all they've really got to show for it is a lot of use cases that sound quite niche to me. And one site in London, which doesn't sound like it's an edge thing, does it, when you're only talking about one site in a geography of the UK size, and then revenue. There's no discernible revenue impact at all. I mean, if you look at Vodafone Business, which is the bit that falls under, and obviously that's a multinational, very, very big unit that makes 10 billion a year in revenues, but its revenues are pretty flat last year. So all right, possibly other things have gone down, and they have seen some kind of uplift from work they're doing in it's both Germany and the UK, by the way, what they're doing with wavelength. But it just doesn't really seem to have gone anywhere very quickly in the last year.
Yeah, and that sort of feeds into my my bias.
It's early days. I mean, I don't want to be really
totally
negative, but
and my bias, I'm perfectly happy to sort of project, because I think it's absolutely vital. I was just talking to my son about this. He's in the middle of his A levels. And
yeah, same.
And I was just talking about how, and he's doing mainly sort of essay subjects, politics, history, and English. And I was going, look, everyone's got a bias. There's nothing wrong with having a bias, but I think a critical thing, from my 50-year-old perspective, is to be conscious of your bias and to know it and acknowledge it and embrace it, and just go, I know where I'm coming into this. And with something like AWS or Google or Microsoft, my bias is definitely they're a bit too big and scary, and so I'm naturally hostile to them because I want to knock them down a peg or two. But then again, I also try and say, but that doesn't mean that they're not, like, I use all three all the fucking time.
Well, I'm like that,
and they're really useful to my life.
One of their biggest customers, but
yeah, I use Amazon all the time as a consumer. I use Microsoft all the time in my day job.
So he watches the tennis.
And the tennis as well, and then I obviously use Google, like Gmail and all that kind of shit as well. So, but I think maybe that makes me, even in a journalistic way, even more hostile to them.
Yeah,
because I just want to knock them down a peg or two while still acknowledging that they provide a lot of useful shit. And so, yeah, with the whole public cloud thing and or whatever else you were talking about with AWS, and when you talk about how Vodafone bigged up something a year ago and there's still nothing to show for it, my bias goes, ha, see, it's all bollocks. And I'm sure it's not.
Yeah.
But then again, I think it's also incumbent on them to demonstrate.
But what they certainly weren't able to do is to come on and say, look, it's 1 year since we launched this and it's really taken off. We've got loads of businesses here that want to use services, and we've had to move more quickly than we expected, and we're doing 6 or 7 edge sites in the UK. Now, that's probably what anybody would want to be able to say about something like that, isn't it? And it just seems to be very, very slow going. And
evidence.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting.
But it was the other thing I would say about it is it was quite well attended. I mean, it was only ever meant to be a small event.
Yeah.
It wasn't set up to be MWC
it wasn't
or anything.
A great big.
The room that the Edge stuff was in was full. I didn't go into the 5G one really, the 5G private stuff. So,
right.
But I heard that was fairly busy. There's a lot of activity around the stand,
cool.
So it's quite nice to see people, out and about and doing physical events again, which is
really cool. And by saying that, you cover our arse in an informal way. We won't get in trouble for slagging off.
Yeah, I'm not just saying events. That because we work for an events business. But
the best list show ever invented. Everybody agrees.
You're beautiful people. We love you. It suddenly turned into a Trump event.
And he was at an event as well.
He was there as well.
Yeah. No, he was at an event.
Oh yeah, he was at an event. Yeah. Where were we at? So it wasn't an informal event.
He was at an event that's
we're
more
allowed to talk about.
Our
I was at it's very apropos. Fiber Connect 22 in Nashville, Tennessee.
Right. Is that first time sorry to take away from the event? Was that your first time in Nashville?
First time in Nashville, yeah.
Okay. How's Nashville before we get back to the event?
I mean, honestly, I went into town for like 3 hours.
Because you flew over and back in 2 days or something.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It was good.
I don't think I can handle that.
But not as hot as Texas.
Right.
I guess it's dry or something, but yeah, fun. Lots of music.
It was 38 when we were in Austin a few weeks ago.
38. Well, it's in the 30s today in London.
31 though, I think.
But this is like a one-off.
It's going to be 40 in Nashville
This
soon.
is a one-off. The papers will get 4 what a scorcher from the sun or something like that. What about the event, Pierre? How was it?
Yeah, it's a busy event, Do
you actually care when you're there doing your videographer stuff? And they're going, well, I think we should do more cables into here.
No, but actually, I'm really interested in fiber because I want to get fiber in my house. So it was interesting,
okay.
And it was like,
why are you going to move to Nashville?
No. There was the CEO from Australia. He was basically building a network in Australia and saying it's not easy. And I'm like, yeah, because it's the whole of.
Can you imagine to Alice Springs or something?
But he takes examples in the
NBN?
US.
NBN Co, that company, or
Render Networks.
Oh, okay, right.
Perhaps the equivalent of Giganet in Australia.
Maybe.
Quite possibly, not as good, I'm sure.
They'd just be called Giganet, mate.
Giganet, mate.
God, that's such a cliche. As we're still doing all these cliches. Okay, so that was all good.
Yeah.
When did you get back?
Wednesday morning.
God, you must be knackered.
No, I never really adjusted to the
Right.
to the jet lag.
What was the
Which
long
is
haul?
only
Were you
6
just
hours.
on bullshit class?
No, it was premium economy.
Oh, okay, well that's something, isn't it?
Yeah, and on the way back, I was by myself. There was nobody next to me. I was
Okay,
like,
so you
yes.
could spread
no,
out
no,
a
no,
bit.
wait. They said boarding is complete. I'm like, nobody next to me. Amazing. 5 minutes later, they bring in a guy from coach.
Some big fat bastard.
No, they didn't, because he had fucked up his reservation or something, and they were saying sorry. And I was like, damn.
Oh God, we've all been there on flights when you're sitting there going, "Oh my God, am I going to get?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then someone squeezes
Well,
their
when I
arse
came back
into-
from Texas, I had an enormous Dutch guy next to me. Like he was squeezing himself. I felt bad for him actually. He was just
Right, he's having
middle
to
aisle.
shoehorn his arse in
He
between
was
the
just
thing.
like this the whole time. Overnight flight as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh,
horrible.
it's so foul.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, we're running out of time. Just one other little thing that I think it might be interesting to chat about is ostensibly India, but there's definitely a private network angle to it. So India's announced its 5G spectrum auction. The spectrum auctions, yeah, we all understand them. I mean, my personal view, talking about telegraphing bias, as we all know, my sort of Scott Pacino libertarian TM moment.
Dun, dun, dun.
I generally don't think the government's on our side. I mean, I think sometimes it is, but by coincidence. I mean, it's just a power base. They got their interests. We got our interests. Industry's got their interests. Everyone's got their own fucking interests. And in India, I always think in the telecoms context, this is particularly apparent because they've had this thing in India for a little while where they had these legacy charges that they threw at Vodafone Idea, as it's called now, which is, as the name implies, is a conglomeration of Vodafone Idea, and then there's Bharti Airtel, and they're sort of saddled with these enormous amounts of sort of debt to the government for historical paying for using licenses. And I think the whole spectrum auction thing, I don't know what you think about this, Ian, or for that matter you, Jarlath. I know it's not your core area because it's mobile, but I think spectrum auctions largely feel like a cash grab by governments, to me. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've written a few articles in the past saying I think it'd be better to do a system where you have a lower fee, perhaps, but more obligations on the company. Meet certain coverage requirements.
But why
and
does
then
there
if
need
they
to be a fee at all? I mean, why can't you just give them it?
just give them the license?
Yeah, just go, here you go. Make
suppose
some mobile.
From a regulatory perspective, they want to make sure that they're giving operating licenses out in a market where you're only ever going to have 3 or 4 companies.
So it's a
building.
constrained market.
In a capital-intensive market, you're going to want to make sure that the license is held by someone who's actually going to fulfil.
Okay, so your point is maybe make the
and
auction about commitments rather than money.
Make it
Right.
more, which I think they do in Scandinavia more. They sort of have quite low fees, but they're required to, meet. And I know we have coverage obligations in other countries, but then if you don't meet them, the penalties attached are sort of fairly pathetic. And I think this whole what happened with 3G was obviously ridiculous. People spending sort of, I don't know what the figures were in the end, but it was over 20 billion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then they. Then they don't really have the money to build out their networks quickly. Obviously, if they do something like that, and there's even been a bit.
Thank God you have that in your space, eh? John?
Yeah, and I think in the mobile sector, obviously been involved in the past in terms on the deployment side, on the build side, and I think that's always been the challenge is that they've burnt not just the payment but the resources and the whole auction process and everything else has been a distraction for management teams.
Yeah,
and being a service provider into the mobile operators, as you find that they're tanked out when they finish the spectrum auction piece. They've no money, but the management team are spent as well, and it's kind of like there's accolades and they move on.
Yeah.
They move on because I managed to get this.
They're going to take a holiday for a year.
Yeah,
to
exactly. So
just to
it has
get
a
over the
contradiction
whole
in terms,
bullshit. Well, so this seems to be particularly the case in India, and obviously India. I don't really know. Any Indian people listen to this, I apologise in advance for my ignorance, but it just seems a bit dodgy. From the moment Jio turned up, it seemed a bit dodgy for me. Jio seemed to get a lot of passes, the incumbents.
I'm not a fan of Indian regulation.
Yeah, exactly.
From what I've observed over the last few years, it doesn't seem to have been done in a way that's designed to foment competition and create a healthy market. It seems to have been about favouring, and certainly Vodafone would definitely agree with me on this.
Vodafone Idea.
I think their treatment of foreign investors has not been ideal.
So a good pun, because it's Vodafone Idea. Anyway, and it can't be a coincidence. Well, I don't think it can be a coincidence that the company that did really well out of all this happens to be run by the richest bloke in India.
Who's also perceived to be very close to the government.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's all that. But they've announced their spectrum auction, and obviously there's only 5G spectrum auction, and there's only three main players, which is Jio, which is the one that I think have benefited from a degree of, let's say, government indulgence to cover my arse.
Yeah.
And Bharti Airtel, which used to be the dominant player before Jio came along, and then Vodafone Idea, which is like all the other people who've done that thing of like, let's turn two failing businesses and get them together and hope to make
it's so ridiculous what's happened in India, hasn't it? Because you go back 10, 15 years, there used to be about 15 operators there.
Yeah, and it was all regional.
This gets back to the whole stuff about how regulation's quite difficult, and even if you take a sympathetic view of Indian regulation, then something's gone really quite badly wrong when you go from a market that obviously was due for some degree of consolidation to have 15 companies just within some circles, I think, as I understand it.
It's very
obviously not right, and they weren't making money. But you go from that to all of a sudden now people are talking about Vodafone Idea not being able to make money properly or
just stay afloat.
Or stay afloat. Airtel's not been in the healthiest position in the last. They might be better. I don't track.
And then Jio's laughing.
And so they've gone from this to almost having not a monopoly, but it's gone possibly to a sort of duopoly position, and
which isn't healthy. And
it just doesn't sound like it.
India's about to become the most populous country in the fucking world. It's overtaking China.
Yeah,
because they're all on the job a bit more, apparently, in India. But anyway, so on that note, lowering the tone. Well, that's a fair conclusion, though, isn't it? If their population's growing more, unless it's immigration.
They don't have a one-child policy.
There we go. Well, nor does China anymore, but they're catching up.
Maybe a lot of manufacturing stuff is moving to India as well.
Yeah.
I thought that's what you meant.
Haven't you heard the term on the job?
No.
You should watch Austin Powers. There's this one bit in Austin Powers, the one gold member where he's got Michael Caine, and Austin Powers goes, "I don't want to watch my dad on the job." Anyway,
on the job.
It's a very English thing, I think. So they're having this 5G auction, and there's all sorts of spectrum involved. It's all the way from 600 megahertz all the way up to 26 gigahertz. They funnily enough call everything below, I think, 3.3 megahertz low band.
Yeah.
Even like 2.3 megahertz, which is I can see that. So they're saying low band is the traditional real estate.
Yeah.
Albeit that's a fucking wide band, isn't it?
But this is an example of the failings of Indian regulation. This, they're only now talking about auctioning off 5G spectrum.
Yeah,
and yet they have this company, Reliance Jio, that's really admired actually for building a heavily automated, state-of-the-art network.
Yeah, and they've got your mate who you chat to at Rakuten.
Tariq Amin, who's probably one of the sort of poster boys for the whole virtualization software cloud movement in telecom, was the main guy responsible for doing that before he went to Japan to work for Rakuten, and yet one of the reasons, as I understand it, the 5G auction's been delayed so long is because the companies, they've got 3 operators now, and
two of them are
sort of so cash-strapped that they come out with their sort of base prices and what they expect to raise for the auction, and the operators go, well, we're not really that, we don't think you should run it now, and maybe more sensibly they should just sort of give them because if they gave them the licenses and said just go on and get on with it, then India would be probably better off. Yeah, it would have 5G networks, it would have things that come about because of that potentially.
Yeah, back to my point about not attaching money to it.
They've got no shortage of software. Who knows, the next Uber could come from India, yeah? But
they've got developers
that's for the 5G world, but they're not going to do that if they don't have 5G networks there. And there's really stupid things that go on. That, like even in 5G, Italy had a stupid spectrum auction where they carved up the licenses so that 2 companies would only get a tiny little sort of 10 megahertz sliver, and 2 others got a huge amount. And it was all done. Clearly, it was done to engineer, because doing it that way would force companies to sort of bid heavily for the 2 attractive licenses.
Profiteering on the part of the public sector.
They raised $7 billion, which was, I think, if you look at now, I've done spectrum charts that show, because the best way to sort of work it out is price per megahertz pop. Sort of boils it down to what they're spending.
Actually, your spreadsheets on that are excellent.
And Italy's like sort of off the, like you say, you need a lot of cells on the right of the Excel spreadsheet, and everybody else is sort of in this column here. It's just crazy. Yeah.
It was mad. So the India thing. So there's that. So I question how fair this spectrum auction is going to be, given that the only company that's got any cash is Jio, which is run by the richest fucker in India. And then on top of that, one thing that's been an ongoing source of niggle, at least as far as what I get incoming when I'm looking for interesting stuff going on in the telecoms world, has been this private network thing. So that there's a bit of an overlap with what we were just talking about before. I think they're setting aside, although from their public proclamations from when I wrote it up, when did I write this up? 2 days ago. We don't know how much of all that spectrum they're setting aside for private.
Right.
But they are setting aside some. And some of the bitching and moaning I've seen implies that they're not only just setting aside some, but they're also giving more benign terms, which is completely consistent with India, because they definitely gave Jio more benign terms than the incumbents had. At least that's my assertion. So, and they're trying all this top-down fucking about, and they're trying to, be the puppet master and go, let's tweak here and tweak there and make this better and that worse. But it does set up this interesting thing, and I'll direct this to you, Jarlath, to see if you've got anything to say about it. Not about India, because I presume that's not a sort of your core concern. But private networks. So we touched on it a minute ago. They're trying to set up this thing. The thing that interests me about private networks, in a broader sense, taking it away from India, is the way the private network market seems to be going. And this is the other thing that you didn't attend at this Informer event, is it seems to be bypassing the telecoms vertical. I hate the term vertical, but I've got to use it because I know it's just there. Telecoms industry, where we've got vendors and we've got other people who can provide the kit. And they're kind of bypassing the normal vertical that they get involved in, which is CSPs or telcos or whatever. And they're going straight to industry. So you'll have Ericsson going straight to, let's say, an Indian massive, probably owned by one of these Ambani people, and going, how about we sort out a private network for you? I'm just wondering, does that in any way impinge on your day job when you have to think about these areas of telecommunications that seem to bypass the normal channels?
Well, I suppose from our point of view initially with private networks, we would look at it as an opportunity because we've got to get fibre to it. Mm-hmm. So if our fibre is within reach of where that private network is going to be deployed, well then that's an opportunity.
Totally.
An opportunity for us. But I think on the broader point, does it set some sort of precedent about the last days of the telcos? If private network, I can't really see it because I think back to the point about SMEs predominantly make up the bulk of what happens in this country, and do SMEs invest in? It's one thing to build it, but then to maintain it and have to deal with upgrades and deal with the next big thing.
It's not their core competence.
And exactly. So you're talking about some guy that's involved in plastics, building a private 5G network for his factory. It's a distraction, isn't it? It just by definition you'd say it's a distraction. So I think if you're a large, there was rumours and talk about some of the car manufacturers building their own private 5G networks to bring automation to their factories. You could probably see how that might work for them, but again, it's not their core business, it's not their core competency, and to try and spin that up in a market where resources are scarce, especially engineering and, you know, really smart people are scarce in terms of that space.
Yeah. You want them to be focused on the shit they're good at.
Yeah, exactly. And we apply those principles in our own business in terms of, you know, what we're not good at, we get the experts in that are, and let them do it.
That's my attitude to nearly everything about maintaining my domestic environment.
Absolutely.
As long as I can afford it, I'll pay some motherfucker to do it.
Exactly,
But actually, on that note, it's interesting because there's also like psychological pain. Like I've had to think about getting a new car this week because my old car, which is very old, has started getting knackered. And there's definite psychological pain when I've suddenly got to start thinking about the car market, and I don't know dick about cars. And then not only do I not know about the mechanics of them, but I don't know about the economics of it. And then I've got to start speaking to used car people who obviously do know more than I do. And I'm thinking, how much am I going to get shafted? And I've got to try and trade in my shitty old car and try and get some residual value. And all that sort of thing. It's quite a lot of psychological pain. And just to extrapolate that, I'm not just getting the violin out for my current car predicament. But, you know, back to the core competence thing. You know, let's say you could be anyone. You could be a certain company and you're thinking, God, if all my bits and bobs in my factory were connected wirelessly and then I could get analytics and I could make all these clever decisions, that would be great. But I don't know where to start. And then ideally you get someone in. It could be a big vendor like Ericsson or Nokia, or it could be a system integrator, or it could possibly even be an operator or even an ISP, I don't know. And they just go, yeah, I'll sort that out for you. I've got a solution, to use the sort of general term we use. Then you'd be like, lovely. But then you've got this massive SLA burden, haven't you? The service level agreement, where you've got to deliver a bunch of shit.
I think one takeaway at the moment from the whole private network space is that there's just it's very fragmented and there's a huge amount of people trying to get into it, and it's really unclear who's sort of going to emerge from that on top. And maybe nobody does. Maybe it sort of becomes like people decide to specialise in certain verticals. You know, you might get companies that go after what car makers need because presumably they're set up for, doing an automated 5G car making factory. Might be some of the requirements are probably quite different from 5G being used in other campus environments. So maybe it goes that way to some extent. You know, I mean, one thing that Vodafone was saying that was quite interesting was, as well as this deal with AWS on the edge, they're trying to concentrate on a few niche areas where they think they can, if they put some resources into that, then there's an opportunity for them to do a lot more than just connectivity. But you don't want to sort of spread yourself really thin. You want to sort of pick something really quite specific to do that, you know, and go after one particular vertical maybe, or even one bit of a vertical and become a real expert in doing that. But
yeah,
like you say, if you try and do all private 5G and we're going to be the guys that go out and do consulting services and everything else that goes along with it,
the private networks guys,
then as an operator you're probably
and that's what I might wrap it up here unless, Jonathan, you got anything else that you want to throw in.
Well, it's one thing, and it's not work related, but I have to say hello to my two kids, and
go for it.
To Ruby and Bobby, and it was funny.
How old are they?
Bobby is 6 and Ruby is 9.
Okay, right, I'm a bit ahead of you. Me and Ian a bit ahead of you. Our kids are doing A-levels, man.
So it's really fascinating. So we were last Sunday. I was showing them the podcast with Ronan, obviously, you know.
Okay.
And I was saying,
and I'm going to be on that.
I said I'm going in here. So of course, Bobby says to me, "Oh, brilliant! So you're going to be a YouTuber." He said, "That's exactly today," because when he leaves school, he wants to be a YouTuber.
Yes.
So he says, "You're going to be a YouTuber."
They all want to be YouTubers.
And where can I subscribe to you? And I was, so I was saying, okay,
you can't subscribe.
I tell you, I'll tell you what. I'll say hello on the podcast. So I just wanted to say a big hello to them.
Okay, cool. Shout out. Nice one. Well, be a YouTuber. It's all good, but I think by the time you're a grown up, being a YouTuber might be different to how it is now.
I have a feeling so.
But no, I mean, I've chatted to my kids about that. I'll go with the tangent. My kids, I've hardly ever seen them watch broadcast TV.
Yeah, same.
So it's amazing, right? I'll go home this evening, and the TV will be off in the house.
Yeah, because there's no need for it.
I'm like some sort of dinosaur that comes in and turns on this big thing in the corner, because they are on their iPads, and it's all either Netflix or YouTube or whatever. Isn't it fascinating when you think about it?
Well, and it's also fascinating because it's quite isolating. Like every now and then, I don't know if you ever do this. Obviously, your kids are a different age, but every now and then, me and my wife will go, right, we're having dinner together. Because we just don't do it very often.
Yeah.
I mean, last night I even roasted a chicken, and then I said that, and my kids just scurried off back to their rooms like little fucking gerbils.
The art of conversation today now is definitely it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And it's weird, and we will insist every now and then. But then the flip side is, my son's in the middle of exams. My daughter has autism, so she likes to be by herself anyway. And you sort of think, okay, well, fuck it, let them.
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely.
It is a bit of a balance.
Yeah.
Anyway, complete tangent there. Oh, we'll wrap it up because I think that's a good note. I mean, I've got no more to say about the India thing, other than say, Jonathan, it's been a delight. We were talking already before we started this pod. We were enough. I had to interrupt Jonathan and Ian because they were going on this massive tangent about like sort of Irish Sea politics. And which I find really interesting as well, and that's
so hot right now.
Yeah.
Well, that's
to be continued, by the way.
I know. Well, no, totally. And I could get into it, but I had to realise that if I did, we'd just never start the goddamn pod. So no, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I'm delighted to have you here, and thank you very much for the awesome bribes.
I was going to say thank you for these.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been brilliant.
And well, you're always welcome back when you want part 2, and then let's just go out and have a off the record sesh one day as well.
That sounds good.
Cool. Okay. Well, on that note, I will say thank you too for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.